We mentioned recently in the program that we intended to replace our home heating and air conditioning system, and that was one of our short-term goals that we were saving up for. So one viewer wrote and said, I'm fairly certain that you probably have a good amount of money in savings. Why don't you take some of that money to pay for the new HVAC system instead of saving up for it? We're going to answer that question, talk about emergency funds and when and how to use them next. Hi, I'm Hope.
And I'm Larry.
From Under the Median. Every week on this channel, we talk about frugality, about saving more and spending less. So if that's something you're interested in learning more about, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Today, we're talking emergency funds because really the answer to the viewer question begins with what is an emergency fund and when do you choose to use it or not use it? So really, we kind of wanted to walk through a little bit of this for you, and we want your feedback as we go along to tell us what your thoughts are about emergency funds. So for us, part of what happened with the HVAC system was this was not a true emergency. So Larry's going to tell you like all the deets on what we found out about our air conditioning, really.
Well, basically, our furnace is a 1992 model, but our outside air conditioning compressor unit is not that old, really. It's I'm thinking we put that in about 2012 or 13. However, it uses Freon, and so Freon now it's been discontinued, and it's very expensive. We have a slight leak in our system. So what our HVAC representative explained to us that we need to do is replace all of it. And that is about a $8,000 to $9,000 investment for us. So is it an emergency? Not in this case, because he's given us 2 to 5 years before we actually have to pull the trigger on that. So we're kind of pushing that one back a little bit. We want to get it done maybe in a couple of years.
Yeah, so his advice was, is it going to cost you some money at the outlay? Absolutely. Is this a screaming hurry situation? No, because it's a little leak, but he said it's going to get bigger. And the problem is what he's paying for Freon now and what he's paying in another 2 years, totally different story, because it is a commodity that's no longer being produced. So the price is going up because the demand is still there. So really, this put us in mind of, as soon as she asked that, I thought really what she's asking is, why didn't you go ahead and just tap into your emergency fund if that's what it's there for? So the short answer is it wasn't an emergency, but this really made us realize we've not spent a lot of time talking with all of you about emergency funds. Now, just last week on the program, we talked about 5 ways to save fast for your emergency fund. If you don't have an emergency fund, you want to save money fast, we gave you 5 ways to do that were pretty painless, all right? So you're going to want to watch that video after you're finished watching this one. But to lay the groundwork maybe a little more effectively than we did last week, let's talk about emergency funds, what they are not, and we're going to give you real-life examples from our marriage, things that came up, and there were times, yes, have we broken into the emergency fund more than once?
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to tell you when we did and when we didn't and why we made those choices. So when we talk about emergency funds, I think we have to say that an emergency fund is different than sinking funds you may have set aside for certain things, all right? So instead of using an emergency fund, for instance, for basic car repairs, we have a yearly sinking fund. We start out with it fully funded and we spend it down throughout the year. All right. If we don't use all that sinking fund, it can roll over to the following year. So we always try to keep a certain amount of money in that sinking fund to pay for basic car repairs. Now, years ago, oh gosh, I don't know what it was when we first got married. So we've been married 33 years. It wasn't much. And now it's closer to $1,000 a year. It's hard to get out of an automobile shop for less than $500-600 these days.
Well, back when we first established that fund, the average cost of a repair on our little Chevettes, they averaged about $100 a
150,
time.
yeah.
Not much.
Yeah.
And now it's almost 10 times that.
It's a lot more than
It
that.
It is quite a bit. On anything semi-major, you're getting close to $1,000 on a lot of car repairs now.
Right. So these are some examples of what we have sinking funds set up for, so we don't dig into our emergency fund for these things. So basic car repairs, if it's going to go over $1,000, we're going to supplement from our emergency fund. Yes, we will.
And the other
yeah.
two categories, just to kind of run it along here, home maintenance, we put a certain amount sinking funds for just regular routine home maintenance and also for basic medical care.
Right. So those are 3 sinking funds we have every single year. So for the most part, if something minor comes up in those 3 areas, don't touch the emergency fund. If it's major, we gonna touch the emergency fund.
So let's talk about what an emergency fund is not.
An emergency fund is not your 401k.
No, we know people
Oh, my goodness.
who dip into their 401ks for different expenses that are certainly not emergencies. Let's take, for instance, maybe a home improvement project. They want to do major home improvement, so they dip into their 401k. Now, 401k is not an emergency fund. That is a retirement fund, and it should be left that way. I think it's kind of dangerous to be tapping into things that you're definitely going to need later on.
Yeah, you're going to retire, really. Do you need a new back deck? Maybe not right now. Maybe you can save up for that back deck rather than grabbing money from your 401k.
Or the room expansion or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
That is something I think that should be just saved up for.
Okay, here's the next thing that your emergency fund is not. Your emergency fund is not money that you have set aside already earmarked for another project or another reason that you need it, all right? It's not, look at your money all the time and think, does that money have a name to it? Is that already designed to pay for Christmas? Is it designed to pay for that vacation we've been saving up for 2 or 3 years? What is that money for? It may have another name on it, and emergency is probably not that name.
No, that kind of gets into robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're taking money out of another category that you're going to need. So, no, not a good idea.
Now, here's our caveat. If you really have been saving money for that Disney vacation is not a need. If something comes up that is a need and you decide, you know what, it's going to be really disappointing, but we can't take that Disney vacation for another 4 or 5 years because we're going to use that money. We're just going to say, you know what? The name of that fund is no longer Disney Fund. It is this. Okay? And if you choose to do that, that's okay. Mm-hmm. But we don't want you dipping into funds that are designed for important things that you're going to need down the line. Don't take money out of your kids' college education fund to pay for something that's not an emergency. Don't be taking stuff out of other places that you should not be taking it from.
Another thing an emergency fund is not. It is not an investment fund. In other words, you don't want to take money that you're going to need possibly for an emergency and putting it into long-term, high-interest, high-risk investments. That is not a good idea. You want a fund that you can get to easily, you can get to it quickly, it's liquid, it's there when you need it. That's what an emergency fund is. So you need to use other funds for those purposes.
And we've had people who have asked, so we're just going to tell you, all right? We keep our emergency fund with a local bank, and it is a high-interest personal checking account. It's our emergency fund. It sits there. It's a do not break glass situation, and break glass in case of an emergency. That's what the emergency fund is, and it just sits there, and it's getting a little bit higher interest rate than the average checking or savings account, and we're pretty happy with leaving it there. People have asked us, do you ever put emergency funds in CDs? We don't.
Oh, no.
I mean, I know there's a case to be made for that, and other people will say, yeah, it's perfectly fine to go ahead and do that, but we just don't. We do have CDs, but we don't use them for our emergency
Yeah, when you
fund.
have money on a CD or in some of those kind of accounts, that money is usually locked up for a certain period of time, or you pay a penalty to take it out. Another thing that an emergency fund is not, it is not an OPM, and that means other people's money. Now, I know people that try to use their credit card as their emergency fund. They say, well, I can always use my credit card. If an emergency comes up, I'll just charge it. What's wrong with that, Hope?
Oh, so it's wrong on so many different levels. So, here's another example of OPM, all right? If you're going to use your credit card as your emergency fund, that is OPM. That is other people's money. You're going to have to pay that back, all right? Now, here's another example, and this was so popular a few years ago. Do you remember this? We had friends that did this, and Larry and I were like, ah! Okay, so they took out a home equity line of credit, low interest rate. Nobody's going to deny that a home equity line of credit is a low interest rate. It generally is. They took out a low interest rate home equity line of credit, took that money from that line of credit, invested it in the stock market because the market was going crazy. People were getting unbelievable returns on money that was invested in the stock market. And on the advice of an investment professional who helped them do this, they put their home at risk by investing that money in the stock market, banking literally on the fact that they would make more money in investments over a short period of time and then pull that money back out and pay that home equity line of credit back. Don't do that.
So they were doing that, and as an emergency fund, they were investing that to use during emergency.
They were doing it in order to bankroll emergency funds.
You know, I can't
because they didn't have one.
I'm trying to think of the term. This is what got a lot of people in
I can
trouble.
think of a lot of terms, but that's
well, this got a lot of people in trouble in 1929 when the great stock market crash happened.
Buying on margin, yeah.
Buying on margin.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's it. Yeah, I keep thinking margarine, not butter. You know, so yeah, not a good thing to do. Okay.
All right. So that's what your emergency fund is not. Okay. Now we have an emergency fund. What do we recommend? A beginning emergency fund. We differ from, let's say, another well-known financial pundit who says $1,000. We actually disagree with him. Sorry, Dave. We say $2,000. And that is what we recommend. It's what we've always recommended. We haven't swayed on that because we've had some emergencies that cost us more than $2,000. That's why. Well, much more than $1,000.
I think it's okay to start there, but that isn't going to cover too many emergencies. That might cover a washer or a dryer going out, maybe a set if you get an inexpensive set.
Yeah.
Because everything has just gone up so much in costs. One of our emergencies actually cost us about $2,000.
Right.
We had high winds come through this area. We had a big old silver maple in the backyard. It was probably a 60-foot tall tree, and we had about a 45 or 50-foot tall evergreen. It was a huge double trunked evergreen. The evergreen
beautiful.
blew down over the neighbor's driveway.
Yes.
And the tree in the backyard lost major limbs. What was left of it wasn't very pretty. We had to remove both trees, and that was about, I'm thinking it was about $2,500 by the time we got all that paid for.
They were huge trees.
They were big.
Absolutely huge. So yeah, it was a significant amount of money. So this is why we say beginning emergency fund. Now that's not the whole emergency fund we recommend, but we say $1,000 for a beginning emergency fund is not enough. You need to really strive for $2,000 for your beginning emergency fund. And then ultimately, you want to build up down the road to 3 to 6 months. We always recommend 6 months. You know what? You don't know when you're going to get laid off. Larry faced a layoff that, never in a million years would have thought he was going to get laid off until shortly before you got laid off. He was like, I'm seeing some signs here I'm not liking. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, we faced layoffs a couple of different times. And
that was during the economic downturn that followed the 9/11 incident. And that was it was in 2002 by the time it caught up with the company that I was working for. So they had to lay off 5 people.
Yeah.
And I was one of them.
But here are some ideas of what an emergency fund is used for, okay? And we'll give you some real examples from our life. An emergency fund is used for a major home appliance failing, major home appliance fail, we're probably going to use our emergency fund to replace said home appliance. Now, as we go through these examples and tell you from our own life when we have chosen to use the emergency fund and when we have said, no, I think we can save up for that, we'd love to know from you in the comments section. Do you agree with us? It's okay if you don't. If you say, you know what, I would not use an emergency fund to replace my washing machine. If you wouldn't do that, that's okay. Tell us that. We want to know when you would and would not use your emergency fund. So for us, if the washer or dryer fails, we are probably just going to grab some emergency fund money and replace it. All right, what's the next thing we would use it for?
Well, we had a hot water heater go out on us just a couple of years ago.
Twice. At the old house we did too. We replaced several hot water heaters.
We replaced 2 here, and they are expensive to replace now. We took that out of our emergency fund. But just kind of like a sinking fund, you still have to pay that money back. It isn't money you can just take and then that's it. You still have to replenish that account and make sure you have some funds in there for the next emergency.
Okay. Here's another thing that we have used our emergency fund, an unexpected car breakdown. And this was like major car breakdown.
You know, I had a 1999 Ford Crown Vic. It was over 100 degrees. And right in the middle of an intersection, a busy intersection, it just stopped.
Yes.
And I didn't know what was going on with the car. So fortunately, I called the insurance. They sent a tow truck and had the car towed. Well, it was just a little fuel pump that went out on it. Do you know what a fuel pump costs these days? A little fuel pump that used to cost $20 to put in your car. Now they have to take the entire gas tank out and to get to it and then replace it. It was close to, I'm thinking it was either $800 or $900 to replace a fuel pump.
And we had young kids. I remember because I was in the car with him with one of our boys who was very young. I remember that. So yeah, we didn't have a whole lot in the emergency fund at that point.
That was
enough.
That was an unexpected repair.
All right, here is another one, an unexpected illness or accident emergency fund. Larry showed up at the back door of our old house one day. It was very icy. He was actually like 15 minutes from getting ready to leave on a business trip. And he thought, I don't want Hope to have to move the garbage can in this icy weather, so I'm just going to put it down at the bottom of the driveway for her before I leave. So he was being so nice. Well, he fell on said driveway.
I face planted myself into the driveway, slipping on the ice. It happened so fast I couldn't even put out an arm to catch myself. It was just splat.
And so he shows up at the back door. I hear this knocking at the back door. I'm like, what is this knocking at the back door? I open it. And here's my husband, like blood is covering his face. I'm like, holy cow.
I remember Dan looked up and he goes, ew.
He was about 2 years old. It's like, ew, Daddy,
Thanks,
you look yucky. Or he's like, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And so, so that was a bona fide emergency up to the amount that we had to pay for whatever the emergency room visit were and like 17 stitches or something like that in your forehead. So, yes, accident or illness. Here is another example of when we have touched the emergency fund. Catastrophic weather-related damage.
Yeah, and we mentioned it. That was the tree that came down in the front yard and the one that lost major branches in the backyard. That was unexpected, and we had to put the money out. I mean, you just can't wait on something like that. Then the neighbor kind of needed to use her driveway. So I don't know why, but she was funny that way. So yeah, that was an unexpected expense.
Yeah,
certainly.
never could we have perceived that a major ice storm in the middle of January would take out not one but two huge trees on our property. Had to do something with them.
So now let's talk about some things that you don't want to use your emergency fund for. Okay?
All right.
You don't want to touch it for these reasons.
You don't touch your emergency fund ever for a family vacation. Vacay is not an emergency. Not.
Yeah. You don't want to use it for a home improvement.
No. If you want to put a sun deck on, save up the money for it. Go ahead, get your estimates, figure out what you can do yourself to try to lower the amount that it's going to cost you for that deck. But don't drain your emergency fund for a sun deck. It's not an emergency.
A brand new car is not an emergency. However, I might say that if your car gets totaled in an accident, you may have to replace it. That's a different story. But just a routine replacement of a car, not a time to touch the emergency fund.
No, don't. Okay, and
Now,
here's another one.
Oh yeah, you don't want to use the emergency fund for just an upgrade on something.
Yeah, that's right. If you are just sick of your old iPhone, upgrading to the new one that does everything except clean your windshield and tie your shoelaces, probably not an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now, here are some questions that we suggest that you ask yourself. How do you really determine? We've told you these are some times we touched the emergency fund, and we also touched on some times that we didn't get the emergency fund out and use it, and we just saved up for it gradually. But what are some questions? How can you determine, is this really an emergency or isn't it? So we have some questions for you to ask yourself before you decide. All right.
First question is there another way to fund this?
Is there another source of money? Is there some other money? Do you have a CD that's due in 6 months? Do you have some other way that you can fund this other than touching the emergency fund? Is there a plan B? I love plan Bs and Cs and Ds. I love to have alternative ways to think about things.
The basics here is that the emergency fund should be used as a last resort.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Question number 2 that they should ask themselves is,
what is our timeline?
Yeah. First question we asked ourselves when the guy said you need to replace your HVAC, we're like, give us a timeline. All right. Now, the next thing we did was gave us a basic budget. Give us sort of a ballpark of what you think we're going to need. We understand it's going to change between now and when we actually do it. But give us a ballpark so we know what we're aiming at. Now, we're saving that amount. But let me tell you, we don't know the exact kind, the type of HVAC system we're going to get because it's not close enough yet. When it's 6 months out, then we're going to say he's going to come over, he's going to talk to us about energy efficiency, show us different models, give us an idea of what we're looking at. Then we're going to finish saving up that amount and we're going to firm up our plans. All right? So do it in that order.
And even if you have some unexpected expense, it's okay and it's fair to ask, is this a need or a want? Do you really have to put out the money to replace the item that failed? Maybe it's not a necessity.
Now, we have an amazing viewer that actually wrote in and said, you know what? I so appreciate you telling me to ask if it's a want or need because, you know what? Our air conditioner failed, our central air. We don't have the money to replace it right now. And we just decided we're going to figure out how to cool ourselves on a day-to-day basis without having that central air. All right? So for them, it's like they decided this is not an emergency for us. We're going to be able to save up that money. It's going to take us a little bit of time. We may be a little uncomfortable in between, but we're going to figure out how to be as comfortable as possible, and we're going to save the money rather than touch the emergency fund.
Another question you need to ask yourself about the emergency money that you're using is how long will it take us to pay this money back?
Right. So when we talk like ROI is return on investment, all right, that's like a terminology you use when you're in business. How long is it going to take me to pay myself back for this investment? All right. So in this time, it's kind of like we're asking you to do that. How long is it going to take you to pay yourself back? How much money are you going to save? One of the things that we did a few months ago, we had a freezer in the garage, a chest freezer, and I kid you not, I think it was 40 years old.
Oh, it was. It was. Yeah.
It was really old. And we actually had an energy audit done a couple of years ago. And the guy walked out in the garage. He's like, he said, you have no idea how much energy you are actually spending on just keeping food cool. If you would upgrade, you would save money. And that's when we went ROI. How long? What are we going to have to put out on this new unit? How much energy are we going to save? And how long is it going to take us to actually save the amount that we're putting into it? What is our return on investment? It's okay to ask yourself that, and in fact, you should. The other question you can ask yourself is not only your return on investment, how much money are you saving by upgrading to this, but I want you to ask yourself, how long is it going to take me to pay the emergency fund back? Mm-hmm. The emergency fund needs to stay funded ultimately at that 6-month amount, all right? You need enough money in your emergency fund, whatever that is for you, to pay for 6 months of expenses because life is uncertain. It's not a fund that you can just drain down. It's not a sinking fund. You have to be able to figure out how you are going to put the money back into that emergency fund once you use some of it and how long it's going to take you to do that, because it may very well have an impact on whether you decide we're going to use it or we're not going to use the emergency fund for this particular need.
Yep.
Hey, we hope you found this helpful. If you have, make sure that you give it a thumbs up and that you leave some comments for us in the comments section. Do you have an emergency fund? Is it 3 to 6 months? And when do you choose to use your emergency fund? And when do you choose to not use your emergency fund? You want to go a little more in depth with us on topics about saving money and about budgeting? We actually have a personal finance planner. And in 55 pages, I walk you straight through how to set up a budget, pay off debt, and how to set goals. So there will be a link to that in the description of this video. And we always tell you at the end, if you're not subscribed, why not? Make sure that you hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed, and I'll absolutely make sure that you are hitting that bell notification button, because that is how YouTube is going to tell you when we drop the next video. We'll see you next week. Living thrift.
Only we say it.
Better. You're really sick of your iPhone, the brand new one. My God, it does everything but change your shoelaces.
They don't do that yet?
Wait a minute. Caught her off guard. No. No, it doesn't.